Hi everybody, Rusty Blackwood here, and I'd like to welcome you to my Halloween video. I'm sitting out here on my patio. The day is actually quite nice. You don't need a coat. I have a sweater on, so I'm okay in that respect. The video is not going to be endless like some of them can be that I've done. Um, and I am doing this video, this is Monday, October 27th. Um, and because I can't be certain that the 31st is going to be nice out here, and also because I'm going to be doing my end of month newsletter within the next couple of days, I'd like to be able to include this video in my newsletter that will arrive to people before Halloween. So, um, this is one of my very favorite times of the year. There's just something about this time of year. There's the energy that's in the air. Um, you can almost see sparks dancing on things because of the energy building. It's very, as I say, it's a very special time of the year for me. Um, for those who are interested in the beyond or the other world, however you might want to categorize it, it is a very special time because the veil surrounding the earth is at its thinnest. And because of that, it allows spirits to pass back and forth. It allows those whom we love, who are no longer with us, to be able to step through the veil and come and visit us on October 31st and November 1st. Even if it's just for a little while. It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And if you have never reached out or sat and spoken to those whom are gone and those whom you still love dearly, I suggest that you just sit quietly. You can burn some candles, burn some incense, put their pictures around, and just sit after the kids are gone, the trick-or-treating is done, and just sit quiet, think about them, talk to them, and you may be surprised at what you may receive. There's nothing spooky about it. There's nothing scary about it. There's nothing bad about it. It is just a wonderful, wonderful feeling and experience. So, maybe you give it a try. I'm going to be, as I do every year. And now for this video, before I really get into it, I'm going to do reading a few poems, and I'm also going to read you a story that is from my children's collection, Through the Eyes of Innocence, that is based in part, again, on my childhood. And when I get to that, I'll explain about it and what makes it kind of special and why I wrote it. So cheers. The very first, my hat keeps falling down here. And the very first poem I'm going to read is, these are, the themes of these are definitely some of them are dark, and some of them I wrote specifically at this time of the year and for this time of the year. And the very first one that I'd like to read, some people don't really understand, some who've read this, it's from my collection of traditional and contemporary poetry called Impressions. But I wrote this in 2006, and actually I based it on a photograph that I saw. I can't even tell you now where that photograph was from, or even if I still have it. But I saw it, and it just, the way it struck me, it was strange, and yet in all, there was something about it that was beguiling, like made me wonder, why is this simple gate, iron gate, standing there? Where does it go? It's just there with nothing on it, no knocking, no welcome, no beware, no enter at your own risk, nothing. Just this iron gate that was painted green. And so I let my imagination kind of take me away a little bit, and I decided to write this poem that is called Iron Gate of Green. Down the overgrown path he shuffles, with collar drawn high against the wind. No one knows what he's trying to hide beneath his cloak so thin. His head hangs low, with scraggly hair peering from beneath a wide-brimmed hat of black. He moves with intended calculation of a long-kept secret hidden in his empty sack. His steps increase as he silently sneaks until he stands before an iron gate of green. As pea soup fog entraps his feet, he stands erect, then takes a peek. What could be there that isn't in the daylight when sunshine cleans away the stench unseen? But as it sets, the rot and slime encase again what hides beneath the iron gate of green. He reaches out with bones that once were fingers, the skin now lost from years of grasping nothing. But as they touch the surface cold, his fingers shake from fear which comes from hunting. The iron gate of green stands fast. It does not move nor relent for anyone. Yet when his bony digits slide the length of bars before him, the bolt creaks long and moans aloud as it opens wide to nothing. He stands in awe, with eyes aglow, and laughs escapes his throat. For all this time the keeper thought he was nothing but a ghost. But as he lunges through the gate, the iron closes firm, to lock him tight in wordless fright where stomachs start to churn. He screams aloud with all his might, though they will not be heard, just like the ones who went before, now lost without a word. And just like them, he'll dwell within and live although unseen, while people stop to ponder at the iron gate of green. So I'll leave that to your own imaginations as to who he was, what he was, and what this gate was all about. Food for thought, isn't it? The next one I'd like to do is kind of cute, but I think I kind of nailed what Halloween night is all about. I again ask you to excuse the noise. And now that the leaves are starting to fall from the trees, as you can see, there's not near as much foliage around me as there was in my earlier videos. And of course, which leaves nothing to absorb the noise. So, I ask for your patience. This one I wrote in 2002. Away. Go, go, go. And the little footnote at the bottom that I oftentimes put with all of my different poetry. I'm going to read to you first. To me, Halloween is a most wondrous time of year, and although the night is for children to act out their wildest imagination, the night is filled with magic beyond belief for those who are truly connected with those who have gone before. Enjoy. Halloween night. Halloween has come once more, with happy children at the door. How I wish I could be back in the country where I grew up. As witches, ghosts, and goblins too take flight in skies of darkest blue. The trees stand bare, their job is done, and now it's time to have some fun. As costumed children run and meet, leaves swirl and crunch beneath their feet. The sky grows black as bats fly free, and spiders spin their webs with glee, with hopes that soon a tasty treat entwines itself and tastes so sweet. Ghosts and demons praise the season, dancing, singing, spirits ringing, while shadows lurk in corners where you dare to tread nor linger there. Candles burn with flickering wicks, while creatures crawl in fog so thick. They stare, lurk, and make a wish that you'll come near with eyes to peer. Winds moan low, and wolves may howl. They watch whatever's on the prowl. Their amber eyes stare with intent. They do not smile, nor e'er relent. Jack-lanterns burn their fire bright, some faces happy, some with fright. They light the path for those who dare to venture forth without a care. This season comes but once a year, so have some fun, raise some cheer, laugh and play. 'Tis the season to enjoy without a reason. As children trick for treats' delight, have fun and smile. 'Tis Halloween night. I think I captured it pretty good. This one is one of my favorite poems that I wrote, concerning this time of the year. I wrote it in 2006, and the footnote down here says, "The horror story. Is there any other kind that grabs you by the throat, holding you prisoner, striking terror throughout your very soul? From the days of childhood, I have loved these kinds of stories. There aren't many artistic venues that can send you trembling beneath the covers faster than a blood-chilling horror story can. And this feeling, possibly the full moon, is what inspired this poem, Fright Night. The night glows black as moonlight's lost to gathering clouds throughout it, and restless bats flap hard their wings and try to find their course. The path will carry them above those held by wandering spirits, which find themselves now running wild like a frightened runaway horse. Above the trees, now bare and stark, the ghosts of those departed fly. They care not who is watching them, with horror rising in their eyes. With screams now heard as bats sweep low above the terror-stricken lot, the spirits laugh as gusts of wind blow them forth, but save them not. A long and gruesome howl's heard, piercing through the night, and with it comes the terror of what soon will be in sight. The hairy beast will show itself in all its raging glory, and soon you'll find that you are trapped within a horror story. You try to run with feet that are cemented to the ground, and all the while your ears are filled with unrelenting sound. But run you must, for if you don't, you know your life will end, and you wonder if the worst will come when you reach the road's next bend. The cold, dark clouds break apart to let the moon shine through. It lights your path and gives you hope with strength that's been renewed. But the wolf is close behind you, and he's closing fast the gap. And in another frantic minute, he'll land upon your back. A scream is caught within your throat between your gasps of breath, but you refuse to slow your pace or dance your way to death. The pent-up scream now breaks away and travels through the wind, but the course has now been set in this game you plan to win. You smell his stench and feel his breath while in your ear he howls. But he forgot the hunters of the night that's on the prowl. And as he's set to make his leap and sink his fangs in deep, his pace now slows as shots are heard, and he falls into a heap. You stop and turn in disbelief that you have just been spared, but shake your head in pure dismay as you stand and sadly stare. This tragic fright night took from you much more than merely cost, for at your feet now lies the man that you had loved and lost. Think about it, ladies. How much do we really know about these men that are come into our lives? Oh, when you let your imagination run, it's amazing what you can come up with. At least me. Now, I'm going to read this story to you from, once again, my children's collection, my second children's collection of short stories called Through the Eyes of Innocence. My very first collection of short stories for children was called Young Minds, and this collection still holds a lot of the same ones that were in Feelings. In Young Minds, that unfortunately is no longer available. But when I wrote Through the Eyes of Innocence, I decided to include the majority of the poems that were in Young Minds and write a few new ones to put in this collection. this this story called "The Happening in the Hollow." Where I grew up, it was sort of as you went down the road. It was the East Routh Road in Southold Township in Ontario, in rural Ontario, and it went down into sort of a horseshoe that the Thames River formed around, and I lived at the end of this road. It was a dead-end road. It was only one way in, one way out. And a lot of the people sort of referred to it as like living in the hollow. Um, I guess you did progress downward when you went down the road because you were going down toward the river. And so, as I say, you gradually kept going downward, as not starkly so, but you were going downward as you went down the road. And right beside me, to the east of where my family home still is, there was an old swamp there. It was there, I guess it had always been there. It is no longer there. My father and our next door neighbor decided they were going to do what they could to drain this swamp because, I mean, it was standing water and it really wasn't the most healthy thing in the world. I suppose it would have harbored tons and tons of mosquitoes in the summer. And I remember a story my grandfather spoke about when he was a boy. And he lived just down the road from where my house, like my family house that he built as a married man. Um, and but when my grandpa was a boy, he talked about people finding dinosaur bones. I don't know what kind of dinosaur it was, but it was not far from the surface of this swamp. And Grandpa said they had taken, the people that came about it, had taken 13 wagon loads of bones up to the train siding, which was Thames River siding, and of course that siding is no longer there because those tracks are now gone, and put them on the train, sent them to New York, and they are in a museum there to this day. Now, I don't know if it was a complete dinosaur or whether it wasn't, but 13 wagon loads of bones. And Grandpa spoke about the size of some of these bones were just massive. They took up the entire wagon bed in order to get them in. So obviously, it must have been a pretty big one. And so at Halloween time, myself and my brother and neighbor kids, we would go out for Halloween. We'd go trick-or-treating in the neighborhood. And you had to walk by this swamp. And if it was, especially the nights of a full moon, made it that much more spooky than actually what it really was. But there was, at night, there always was mist rising off this swamp. And of course, because of the difference in temperature of the water and the air. But when you're a kid, you don't think about that. You just see the fog rising and you hear the noises and all of the creaks and groans of the trees and everything around and in this swamp. So it was really eerie going by that thing at night. Not so much in the daytime, but definitely at night. And so I decided that I wanted to write a story based around that swamp. And because our neighborhood was always considered the hollow, I decided to name it The Happening in the Hollow. It was October 31st, Halloween, the spookiest night of the entire year. That is, if you are a kid. That was the night of the happening. Muskrat Hollow was a strange place, and things would happen with no explanation as to why. But when Halloween rolled around, things became even stranger than usual. Excuse me. The children of the Hollow were anxious to get going. Time was of the essence that night, and it was fast running out. George Crawford and his sister Eileen lived next door to a swamp which had the reputation of being haunted. And even though George considered himself a budding scientist who believed in solid fact, found himself on the verge of running at top speed at the very notion of passing this talked-about place at night. The older boys of the neighborhood had earlier decided the children would gather in front of the house of Silas Boggs, which in itself looked creepy even in daylight, but they thought it the best place to begin their spooky journey. It probably didn't help matters that the moon was full, or that the house sat right next door to the neighborhood cemetery. Besides, if nothing else, this sinister setting made a great addition to the theme of the evening. They were a brave bunch with nothing to fear, for they would be traveling in a group, and it was always thought that a bigger gathering posed a much larger threat to any wayward spook that just might be searching for someone to frighten. They had it all planned. They would set out from Old Man Boggs, which was located at the mouth of the hollow, hit all the houses on the right, and work their way down the old gravel road until they got to the swamp. They weren't too sure about that place, yet it was Halloween. The night was supposed to be eerie. And what better place to feel totally frightened out of their skin than to go where only the bravest of the brave would dare to venture. After they got past the swamp, they would call on the Crawford house located at the end, make their way past the swamp on their journey back, take in the houses on the left, then on to a victorious end where they would partake of their haul while enjoying the costume party to be held at the schoolhouse later that evening. But not everyone was looking forward to the festivities of the night. Jack Maynard was a loner. He had been sent from his grandfather's ramshackle house in Regina to stay with a cousin in hopes it might help him change his disruptive ways. But so far it had not. Jack was known as the neighborhood bully. He loved nothing better than to pester the girls to the point of tears, trip the smaller children whenever they tried passing him, cut holes in their lunch bags at school, make lurid noises when asked to be quiet, and if that wasn't enough, he further got his menacing pleasure out of placing tacks upon the chair of the unsuspecting teacher. It mattered not how many times he was caught or even punished, for he continued in the exact same manner each and every day. His entire conduct hadn't won him any friends for the entire time since arriving, but regardless of whether he was liked or not, he was present at the gate in front of the Boggs house that night, dressed in his everyday clothes when the children began to gather. "It's about time all you dumb creeps finally got here," uttered Jack, as he stood cracking gum in his mouth. And I ask you to please excuse the yapping dog. It never fails. "Ah, knock it off, Maynard," replied Tom Beecher, tugging at the soiled scarf of his scarecrow costume. He was one of the bigger boys and one who was not so easily threatened by Jack. "Better be on your best behavior tonight and none of your usual goofing off. Come to think of it, don't you have to be somewhere?" "Stuff it, Beecher," answered Jack, cracking his gum louder between spits upon the ground. "I'll go when I get good and ready." The two watched as more kids gathered. They were dressed as assorted ghouls and goblins, a few already showing fear of the entire situation, but nonetheless held empty pails at the ready. "Where's Stretch Crawford and his beanpole sister?" questioned Jack in puzzlement. A younger boy who lived on the adjacent side of the swamp commented that they were nowhere to be seen when he left to join the group. "Sounds like Crawford," relayed Jack in a scoffing manner. "He talks a good line about how brave he is, but it's plain to see he's as yellow as a snap bean when it comes to passing that old swamp at night, even though he brags different." "Lay off!" snapped Tom. As they stood waiting, some pawing the ground like nervous bulls, shouts could be heard from a distance. Soon they grew louder as the children could see a tall clown and a thin witch barreling up the road as if the devil himself was after them. As they drew closer, the children could see it was George and Eileen Crawford. "Hey, look at them run!" "Ha ha!" laughed Jack. "See, I told you he was yellow." Everyone ignored the bully's latest jammering and called their hellos to the new arrivals. George's face was as white as a ghost, his sister not quite so white, although she too looked as if she'd just seen something she'd rather not mention, as they lost no time blending into the excited crowd. "Hey, Crawford, I see you said you weren't I thought you said you weren't scared of nothing. Bet you hid behind your skinflint sister passing that old swamp," teased Jack. "I'm not afraid," George quickly replied, catching his wind. "After all, there's nothing there that isn't in the daylight. Besides, it's a natural happening. It's just that place gives me the heebie-jeebies, just like it does everyone else, including you." Jack scoffed at the mere thought, although he too had to admit there was something not quite right about it. "I've heard stories about that place," whispered Tom, trying his best to keep from frightening the younger ones. "But I'm sure that's all they wear. It's been there a long time. You'd think if there was any truth to the stories, our fathers would have done away with it long ago." "Yeah," relayed George. "My dad says it's always been there. He's told some pretty hair-raising stories about things he's heard, stuff he's seen, too. But I still say it's just a swamp, nothing more, nothing less. Now, don't you think we'd all best get started before the night's completely over?" They all agreed, and none too soon, for a few of the younger children kept showing signs of turning tail for home. The older boys were quick to assure them all was well, and if they hung in there like good little soldiers, they would be well rewarded in the end. It seemed to pacify them for the present, for they settled down and began to follow their leaders. The group hadn't gone far when they heard a noise from behind them. Tom whirled around, as did George and Jack, just in time to see Silas Boggs crouching beside an old split-rail fence a ways in the distance. "What's that old geezer up to?" questioned Tom, stretching his neck to get a better view. "Hey, Boggs!" hollered Jack. "What do you think you're doing? We see you there, and we don't think it's funny." Tom had to wonder about the old guy as well, but he figured he was just trying to have some fun of his own, even if it was somewhat strange. "Mr. Boggs, if you really want to come along, you're welcome to. It beats hiding beside an old fence and missing out on all the fun," relayed Tom, still trying his best to catch a glimpse of him. Not a sound was uttered from the direction of the fence. The children all looked at each other with inquiring expressions, although they knew they had done their part by inviting him, and it was his own fault if he didn't wish to go along and have fun on this scary night. So they carried on. Each house was turning out to be better than the previous one, and their pails slowly filled with mouth-watering treats of every kind. They couldn't wait to sample them, but they knew they must wait until they arrived at the party where the treats could be examined by their parents. For even though they all lived in the same neighborhood and knew each other, they realized they must be careful, for one never knows what can happen when candy is bought from stores, and not all people are kind. As they passed beneath a leafless tree, 3 owls hooted loudly, causing a few of the kids to scatter as if a gun had gone off. "Ha ha ha ha!" laughed Jack, grabbing his belly and practically falling to the ground. "Look at them run! You'd think they were getting shot at, and it's only a couple of old hooty owls in the tree. Boy, what a bunch of spineless dopes!" This outbreak angered Tom to the point where he turned to Jack and stated, "That's not funny in the least, Maynard. It'd be a far different story if it was you running scared." "Ah, come on, Tom, I'm only having some fun here. Don't get yourself bent out of shape over nothing serious," replied Jack in a serious tone. When they all thought about it, they for once had to agree with the bully, for this time he was actually right, and it was only because their nerves were on edge that made them react like they did. But the further down the road they went, the more nervous they became, and before they realized it, the swamp loomed before them. "Holy mackerel! There it is!" stuttered a tiny boy dressed as a ghost. "It's okay, little guy," soothed George, trying his utmost to reassure the little fellow, either that or himself. "Eileen and I live right next door, and we've never seen anything unusual. I think it's just because of the spooky night and all the stories we've heard. But try and remember, they are only that, stories." They crept closer, inching their way past the sounds of the marsh, all the while fighting the urge to barrel forward at the speed of light. Yet the older children knew if they gave in to their fears, they'd have an outright panic on their hands as far as the little ones were concerned. They did quicken pace slightly, but held their thoughts upon the party awaiting them in just a little while. "See, I told everyone there's nothing to fear about this place," said George, but as he spoke he made sure to check over his shoulder with each step. "Hey guys, look at me, I'm Brave George," said Jack, mimicking the boy's movements yet exaggerating everything about it. "Oh, I'd better watch my step. I might end up in the drink, or maybe I'll be eaten by some horrible three-legged ah!" All the kids whirled around, certain something had gotten the loudmouth, but there he stood, bold as brass. "I got you," he scoffed loudly. "Too bad you're all so easily taken in. There's nothing all that scary about this place, and I'll prove it once and for all. I'm going to wade in there, and you can all witness it for yourselves." Everyone stood watching, not really sure whether they should remain or leave, for Jack was really starting to get on their nerves. A little girl started to whimper, and it made the big boys call after Jack, telling him his antics were frightening the small children and to stop his nonsense before he scared them even worse. But there was no answer. Everyone figured he was doing his best to cause even more upset, but they were not going to let him spoil this night. Tom and George led the way, but as they moved along they again heard movement coming from somewhere behind. They were positive it was Jack, being his usual annoying self, so they carried on. With an excited sigh, they finally passed the swamp's edge and quickly ran for the front door of the Crawford house. "Trick or treat!" they all called out loudly just as the door opened. They each stepped forward, holding their pails in front of them as Mr. Crawford dropped brightly orange and black wrapped molasses candy within. He asked them if they were having fun, even though they'd come by the swamp. He laughed when they told him about their frights so far this evening, but he reminded them it was all part of an old-fashioned Halloween night and that he would soon see them at the party. He was going to be one of the judges, and by the looks of the costumes, he knew he would have his work cut out. They all thanked him and once again made their way along the road. As they approached the swamp, they again thought they saw movement, and this time they were right. As their eyes peered through the rising mist, they could see Silas Boggs throwing something into the water. But before they could say anything, he turned, then stumbled up the road toward his house. They watched him in the moonlight for as far as their sight could last, but he soon disappeared completely. "Wow!" exclaimed Tom, clutching the handle of his pail in a death grip. "That old man gives me the creeps. Wonder what he was dumping in there, or who?" "It's anybody's guess, Tom, but I'm sure we'll never know. Besides, I think we're letting our imaginations totally get the best of us," replied George, gazing at his friend with an uncertain look upon his face. "But I do agree with you about one thing. That old man sure is creepy." "Well, we'd best be lifting anchor and hit the rest of the houses, 'cause it's getting late and the party's about to begin," said Tom, glancing about. "By the way, where do you think Jack's gotten off to? Not that I miss him that much, but we all should stay together." "You should know him by now, Tom. He always has to take things beyond the limit, and I'm fed up with it," answered George. "Yeah, I got to agree, but it's not like him to give up the chance to scare us to the bitter end," replied Tom. "Maybe we just better forego the left side of the road and get these kids to the party. After all, we've got enough stash to last till Christmas and beyond." "I say we get the lead out and get moving. If Jack wants to goof off until morning, then I say let him," stated George with annoyance. They started in the direction of the school, but quickly stopped when they heard what sounded to be a muffled scream. None of them were sure what to make of it, but they felt they had to check it out. No doubt it was their imagination working overtime, but if they didn't investigate, they'd have to live with the knowledge they didn't help if they could, and none of them were raised that way. "Eileen, keep the little kids back with you," said her brother as he and Tom moved closer to the swamp. "See anything yet, George?" "No, but the mist is so thick it's hard to see anything." "Let's try going around this way," suggested Tom, as he carefully stepped near the water's edge. But the sound was again heard, but this time it came from the far side of the swamp. With no time to lose, the boys tore toward it. "It's right here!" "Tom, be careful," urged his friend. "George, I don't believe this. Look!" They stood cemented to the ground as a hand rose above the swirling mist. They couldn't believe it, but there it was, plain as day. "Run for your lives!" hollered Tom as he fell backward, fighting to stay on his feet. The group of children tore down the road, stumbling over their feet as they ran. None of them had ever traveled the old gravel road so fast, and as they grew closer to the school, they were hailed by the voice of an elated Silas Boggs, shouting at them from behind a tombstone in the cemetery. He tried coaxing them to join him, but they ran toward the schoolhouse as fast as their jellified legs could carry them. Their horror-stricken eyes could not believe what they had witnessed that night, and each parent had to contend with the unbelievable story they were being told. They were certain it was just overactive imaginations getting the better of them, no doubt caused by the excitement of the evening. After all, it was Halloween. The moon was full, and it caused shadows to appear from even the smallest objects. The tall tales spilling forth reminded them of their own childhood when they made their yearly jaunt past the old swamp on this spooky night, and they laughed as they tried settling their adrenaline-charged kids. The next morning, Tom and George returned to the swamp, not because they were brave or felt the need to prove it, but because it was the last place Jack had been seen. The day before, he had mentioned he was going away. Tom even remembered referring to it while they bantered back and forth on their way to the swamp, but he never revealed where that was. Maybe he had left. After all, he didn't figure he'd be missed where he was, and there wasn't one person in Muskrat Hollow that knew for sure. If there was, they never came forth. The neighbors searched the entire area from stem to stern, trying to find him. They even called his grandfather to see if he might have jumped a train to the west. The sad part of the entire situation was nobody seemed to care. Yet one thing was certain. Jack Maynard was nowhere to be found, nor would he ever be seen again. Makes you wonder what happened to Jack, or where did Jack go? Well, that's the fun of writing these kind of stories. You can just let your imagination run wild and write it the way you're visualizing it in your mind, and then just leave it for everybody's imagination as to what did happen to this kid. I like to think that he just went away, but maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed these readings tonight, or today. You may be watching this at night, I don't know. But I've enjoyed bringing them to you and reading them to you, and I hope that you've enjoyed joining me for my Halloween video. So I'm going to close and for now, and go about the rest of my day. I hope when Halloween night comes, you all have a great time. You enjoy yourselves. Be kind to the children. Please don't get impatient with them. Be generous with them. And if you see some that you feel are a little too old to be doing this, please still be generous and give them some candy. I had, a few years back, I had an adult man come by. He was dressed in overalls and didn't mean me any harm, and came up with a pillowcase and opened it up and just looked at me and said, "Trick or treat." And I kind of thought, well, I think you're a little old for this, but hey, I don't know your circumstances. Maybe, for all I knew, maybe he hadn't eaten in a while, and even though candy is not the best thing to fill up on, but sometimes if that's all you've got, then, it's better than nothing. And so these are the kind of things to keep in mind if you ever encounter this kind of thing on Halloween night. And so I hope you all have a very, very nice time. Be safe, enjoy yourself, and be sure to check your children's candy thoroughly, very thoroughly. If you get candy apples, when I was a kid, it was safe to eat candy apples. But now, if I was you, I would just simply toss them, because you just don't know. You can cut through them and everything else, but you may miss the least little thing, needles, blades, whatever. So please be safe. So again, I would like to wish God's blessings to each of you, and I'll be back soon with a new video. I don't know just yet what it's going to be about, but it will be something. I enjoy doing them, and I hope that you enjoy watching and listening to them. So until then, everybody take care and be well. Bye for now.